This week we're looking at Cubism. Cubism is the joint invention of Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso. And at its core, it's really a study of how color and line function as tools of representation. And what they're interested in is examining the limits of that representation. Like, when does color just become color and not an object? When is a line just a line and not like part of a larger image? The name comes from a critic who said that the paintings looked like little cubes. As you heard in the video, though, that's not really what Cubism looks like. Now, Cubism and graphic design is a little bit complicated. For one thing, Picasso and Braque have no interest at all in graphic design. They're not thinking about it in the least. The other thing is, if graphic design is about communication, how can a style that's meant to deconstruct and disrupt reality work as a tool of communication? And so that's the key question that we're thinking about as we study how Cubism shapes graphic design in the second decade of the 20th century. So this is an example of analytic cubism, and you watched a video about this. It's about reducing the forms into planes and lines and colors, almost as if you were walking around and looking at the object from multiple perspectives simultaneously. So this primarily appears in painting, but they do some sculptures also. I want to talk a little bit about synthetic cubism. So this is an approach to cubism that relies upon collage. So you can see here what Picasso does is this is called the bottle of Suze, and he literally takes a label from the liquor bottle Suze and glues it on the page. He glues it on top of this like trapezoidal white shape, and then he uses cutout newspaper on either side of it. Now, somehow this trapezoidal shape comes to represent a three-dimensional form. And why is that? Well, it's partially because of this little black thing right here, which makes it look like it's the top of a bottle. But then down here, this circle along the edge of it makes it look like the bottom of the bottle. And that's really interesting because it's negative space here, right? Like it's not like he puts a cutout of a circle there. Rather, he cuts a circle away from this brown piece, and then that is what forms the bottle. And so he's really interested in how, if I combine these different shapes, what kind of communication can appear. And so as you think about Cubism and graphic design, it's sort of about this combination of different elements through which a new message can emerge. So we'll look at it first in literature. This is a poem by Apollinaire. Apollinaire is a Frenchman, and he unfortunately dies in World War I. But this is a poem that he wrote called Viser, which means aim. And it's from a collection of poems called The Calligrams, beautiful writing. And this is an example of concrete poetry. It's a poem in which the visual structure of the words and the typography are meant to complement the meaning of the text. So viser means to aim, and it's sort of like, it's also the viewfinder of a gun. And so you can see that this is sort of like bullets spraying across the image. And one of the lines is that the machine guns of gold are croaking legends. So it's very much about his experience on the front. Here's another one, il pleut, which means it's raining. And here the text is like drops of rain emerging from the top left all the way down. And so often these calligrams, because Apollinaire was friends with Picasso and Braque, it's seen as being like Cubist poetry. But this is pretty elite stuff. It's not at all meant for the mainstream. This is the person that brings Cubist design more into the mainstream. This is Frank Pick. He's British, and he's not a designer. He's a publicity manager for the Underground Group. This is a conglomerate that consolidates several different London subway lines in 1906, and the predecessor of, well, what becomes known as the Underground. So he recognizes that consumers are a captive audience. You can thank him for coming up with the idea that you should have ads on the subway. He also set up designated hoardings that were used exclusively to advertise the underground subway itself. And he hires really avant-garde designers to produce these ads for the underground. So this is a poster from before Pick's time. This is advertising the two-penny tube. So this is a central London railway before it was bought out by the Underground. And you can see that this is, I mean, it's fine. It's kind of charming, I guess. You see the people, here they are, they buy their ticket, and then they give it to the ticket counter, and then they take the elevator down, and then they get on the Underground, and then they get out where they're going. And then across the center, this is the train line, and take the two-penny tube and avoid all anxiety. So, it's fine, but it's definitely not avant-garde. I mean, this is 1905. It's the same year as the Priester poster is being made in Berlin. And like, this is so hokey looking in comparison to that. So Frank Pick has this idea that the underground needs to be branded in the same way that all companies are being branded. And so he hires Edward Johnston to produce the Johnston Sands typeface. It's typography that's only for use in the London Underground. Johnston also designs a logo for it. So when you look at this, it has the type of geometric abstraction that we began talking about at the end of the 19th and the early 20th century. So we have a perfect circle, and then this rectangular underground on top of it. But the combination of different geometric shapes should also start to remind you of Cubism. So this is a poster by Edward McKnight Coffer called Winter Sales. And so the Underground, they want to increase their ridership on the weekends. People are using the Underground to get to work, but they're not using it to go run their errands on the weekend. And so this poster is saying winter sales are best reached by Underground. And what you have here is the rain, because of course it's London. And these are people holding umbrellas. And you can see that this is kind of cubist, right? Because what is this shape right here? Are those feet, and that's like water splashing behind them? Is that different? Is that like a woman's coat or her hair? It's not clear, but you get the sense of like all of the people moving through the space. So it should remind you of the way that Picasso is layering different shapes in order to create three-dimensional form in his analytic, or rather his synthetic cubism. So it's very much about this layering of different shapes in order to create motion and space. Here's another one, Austin Cooper. It's warmer down below. This is literally cubes, right, that are suggesting heat. So again, you should ride the Underground because it'll be warmer than it would be if you walked. So they're trying to get people to ride the train on the weekends rather than just for their commute. And then eventually all of this emphasis on geometric form leads to these underground maps. I mean, this map for public transportation is something that we kind of take for granted, but it's really something that comes about because of Frank Pick and the innovation that he has for the London Underground.